Dr. Barry Katz from IDEO. I'm so pleased that he'll be talking about design as I'm singing over the lovely music and the human condition. So, Dr. Katz?
Yes, thank you very much. I have to apologize just in case there are any glitches here. I assumed that since I'm in the Bay Area, I could bring everything on a Macintosh and it would work. Because whenever I speak outside of the Bay Area, I am reminded that we have this misapprehension here that the world is about equally divided between Mac users and PC users, which is not the case. So it's so nice to be speaking here where everybody would be Mac, and it turns out that you're not. So I'll just...
this is Hewlett.
Duly noted.
So gently reminded.
Yeah, so I'll just finish this presentation and I'll throw my computer in the garbage. Sheila. So.
No, we're recycling.
Okay, yeah. In fact, I am affiliated with IDEO, although I'm not technically an employee of IDEO, so I'm not speaking the IDEO line. They consider me... they call me an IDEO fellow until I leave the room, at which point I think they call me an outpatient. And then I also have a couple of day jobs in the engineering school at Stanford and at the California College of the Arts. So I cover a lot of design territory, and I am very happy to be here, and I am very happy to have been invited, and I'm very happy to be in the company of so many people who enjoy giving away money for a living. And I don't know that I'll have any very specific ideas for you, but my brief is, did I just break it? No. My brief has been to talk to you about design and the human condition, which seems to be a modest assignment. So Shireen asked me to do a few other things, which is recount briefly the entire history of design and predict the likely course of its future development over the next several centuries, and if there's time at the end, to prove the existence of God and a few other things. So I'll do my best. What I would like to do is I'm going to keep this talk hopefully very brief and at a rather high level of abstraction rather than get down into the details of how you might use current trajectories in design practice in your own work, and we can talk about those things perhaps afterwards. But I wanted to give you a larger perspective of what designers are doing and what they are not doing and where it all came from. And I think I will start here with my favorite design critic. Here is Ezra Pound in his mugshot shortly after he was arrested by Allied troops for broadcasting pro-Mussolini fascist statements over Italian radio. So he was a kind of a nasty guy in that respect. Unfortunately, he was also the greatest master of the English language since possibly Shakespeare, and maybe including. In the cantos, canto number 46, Pound is remarking on the sack of Rome in 1527 and imagining, as I think about it, the accomplishment of the Renaissance. It was the last moment in history that combined in its artifacts things of beauty with things of utility. And with the collapse of the Renaissance culture under the French invasion, we begin this trajectory over the next several hundred years of beautiful things being useless and hanging in museums, and useful things being ugly and ending up in our kitchens, our glove compartments, our garages, and our desktops. So Pound concludes, 1527, thereafter art thickens, thereafter design goes to hell. So it has terrible consequences for both sides of the equation when art and utility move separately. So that's the first 300 years or so of design. The next 100... I told you this is going to be quick. This is serious, and we don't have a lot of time. Part two of the story is associated with the great design thinker and design reformer William Morris, who bursts upon the scene in the 1870s and becomes the principal iconic figure of the so-called arts and crafts movement. The college that I teach at in San Francisco was until recently the California College of Arts and Crafts, and that refers back to the legacy of Morris and not to Cub Scout troops making belt buckles and things. Morris decried what he called the prospect of reforming design and thereby reforming society, since the things that we make and who we are and how we organize ourselves are so closely interrelated. He decried the possibility of doing so in some kind of an arid, formal way. A set of rules deduced from a sham science of design will lead nowhere. So what we then had in the aftermath of Morris was about another 50 or 60 or 80 years of sham science of design, and we've still got a few sham sciences of design, in my view. I go to a lot of conferences, although they are rarely in rooms that smell as nice as this one, because the Ethiopian coffee, that's a great idea, in which I hear learned colleagues talking about what I think are sham sciences of design. Morris was the principal figure in attempting for the modern age to bring the currents of design back together, things of beauty, although we can think of that in a much wider moral sense and not just physically attractive artifacts, and things of utility, to think about the true importance of the designed object. So he really launches the field of modern design. And as you can see, or as you could have seen before I just lost my image, help, which, he's back. As you can see in this wonderful photograph by his friend Emery Walker, in 1896, the last year of his life, he died profoundly depressed. So if you think Sheila's depressed, Morris was at the very beginning of the industrial age and feeling like it was a complete lost cause. In any case, the sham science of design continued to unfold over the next few years. Here's the quick 20th century history of design, which I have compressed onto one slide for your, for your viewing pleasure.
Is this a pop quiz?
It could be. I mean, I've abbreviated things and I've left a few things out. But, I mean, basically we get the 1920s, the Bauhaus and Corbu and all of these characters that I'm sure you are familiar with, discovering that we live in an age of technology and our products should look like the machines that produced them. Marcel Breuer on the upper left, I'm not going to go through all of them, don't worry, riding his bicycle to the Bauhaus in 1927 and then hauling it up 3 flights of stairs and sitting down on a really uncomfortable wooden chair and wondering why he can't have a chair that's as well designed and as efficient as his bicycle. So he hires a plumber to take the thing apart with a torch, and he reassembles his bicycle as a chair, inventing tubular steel furniture, which most of us are sitting on at the moment. And so on and so on and so forth. In the 1930s, in machine age America, it's the age of commercial aviation, it's the age of these enormous hydroelectric power developments, the TVA, the Hoover Dam, and everything like that. And into this situation marches this new breed. It's actually a new race of aliens known as industrial designers who invent the idea of streamlining. And what we want is all of our products should be as efficient as a DC-3 or a highly streamlined railroad locomotive. So these guys just began streamlining the hell out of absolutely everything. Wall sconces were streamlined. On the bottom right there, you see Raymond Loewy, who's the greatest of these guys, hucksters to a man, but with his famous streamlined pencil sharpener, which goes much, much faster because of its aerodynamic qualities. Lastly, and I will draw this to a close because I'm afraid if I touch this, it will begin to oscillate again. By the 1950s, having streamlined the hell out of the universe, we had just gotten through the Second World War. And although Leave It to Beaver and Ozzie and Harriet and all that tell us it was a world of great optimism, people were actually scared to death. And it's reflected in the designed products. I mean, the basic premise of all of my work is that the things that we design are a reflection of our fears, our anxieties, our hopes, our aspirations, our social structures. So it's perhaps not entirely accidental that in the 1950s, wall clocks began to look like small nuclear explosions. It was the push-button world, and we were living under the threat of push-button extinction. And more fancy high technology products such as the IBM Selectric were beginning to show up. And here the very great industrial designer Elliot Noyes on the bottom right is trying to figure out how to make a very sophisticated technical apparatus less scary. Start out by making it red and then smooth it over a lot. That brings us up almost to where we are now, and I will just summarize the current situation with a quote from one of the greatest thinkers in contemporary design, Alessandro Mendini, whom I had the great pleasure of hosting during a visit to California some years ago, one of the last of the titans of Italian design. And in the lecture that he gave at that time at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, he dropped on me a question that has simply haunted me ever since. What objects have the moral right to enter the 21st century? And everybody kind of chuckled and thought it was a charming thing to say, and he has this wonderful lilting Italian accent. I am absolutely haunted by that question, which is, I think, the truly riveting one that we all need to be thinking about. So that brings us up, here is another portrait of Alessandro Mendini. He's, among other things, the design director of Swatch, design director of Alessi, and here are two Alessi corkscrews, which happen to reflect Alessandro on the left and his girlfriend, Anna Gili, on the right. And if all of the things that he created didn't exist, I wouldn't really care very much. I don't own any of them, and I'm not particularly drawn to them, but there is a quality of thought involved. He is simply using corkscrews or swatches or houses or whatever else as templates, as base substrata for working out ideas. Okay, that brings us finally into our own backyard and into the environment in which we find ourselves discussing these serious issues. Now, sometime around 1980, if you can't make out my little captions there, that's a microprocessor on the left and a macroprocessor on the right, aka Silicon Valley, seen as you were approaching the San Jose airport. And I should say it often happens. Shireen has the misfortune of having taken one of my Stanford continuing studies classes, and I always have a few retired engineers in there. And I once showed a slide similar to this, and in the middle of my sentence, a guy woke up in the back room. He was about 82, and said, "Oh, that's a Motorola 8008. I worked on that sucker." Which never happens in my undergraduate ID classes, which is one of the charms of dealing with grown-ups. In any case, the situation that we found ourselves in about 25 years ago or so, roughly 1980, so we're about at the same time period that Sheila started us thinking about, is the products of Silicon Valley research and development laboratories began to move out of the lab and into the market. And that is the point at which designers are in a position to add value to what they are doing. And so we saw the fortuitous rise of the great Silicon Valley design consultancies. This is a phenomenon that does not exist anywhere else in the world, although many attempts have been made, some quite successful, to replicate it. It's basically part of the comprehensive integrated phenomenon of Silicon Valley, along with the fluidity of venture capital flows, the legal infrastructure, the real estate infrastructure. It is all part of the story. And the design consultancies, IDEO, that I'm affiliated with, but also our dear friends and bitter enemies, Frog and Lunar and many, many, many others. There is a greater concentration of design activity in Silicon Valley than anywhere else in the world. So what happens there? It is an extraordinary moment in design because unlike the celebrity designers of the 1930s and the 1950s and the 1970s, who were basically being asked, here's last year's toaster, make it niftier for next year. And so they made it niftier by streamlining it if it was boxy, or making it boxy if it had been streamlining, and basically doing nothing of tremendous significance. In the period around 1980 and thereafter, designers were being challenged in a way that they were, by the way, completely unprepared for, and that is a significant piece of my reflection on this. They were challenged not to improve categories of existing products, but to create categories that did not themselves exist at all. So here comes, I'll use my neighbor, Stephen Jobs, marching in to what was then David Kelly Design and is now IDEO, and saying, we need you guys to work on what the patent calls the XY position indicator, which was more popularly known as a mouse. How do you get information data in and out of a computer? I know how I do it. I call the tech guy and I ask him to help. But we are all familiar with the mouse. Now, the folks at this fledgling consultancy formed by a bunch of refugees from Stanford's product design program, they couldn't take out the catalogs and the annuals and the yearbooks and look at last year's mouse and the mouse before that, because there was no such thing. There was this unwieldy $400 apparatus that had been developed at Xerox PARC. That was designed by engineers for engineers and not really suitable. So one of them, a very dear friend of mine named Jim Yurchenko, marched across the street. They were at this time in a little studio above Roxy's dress shop on University Avenue, walked across the street to what used to be Walgreens and is now a smoking shell that is being rebuilt, and purchased a butter dish and for 79 cents and a tube of banned roll-on deodorant, and removed the ball from the deodorant. This happens to be a true story, unlike most of the others that I'll tell. Removed the ball from the deodorant, glued it into the butter dish, and prototyped the world's first mouse. And there are at least 500 million of those little critters scampering around on our desktops now. But the interesting thing about it, again, is it was somewhere in between invention and design, and it was an industry inventing itself in real time. So what we had there was a continuation of this story of one discipline after another, after another, after another being brought to the table as we think about how to bring a new product into existence. In William Morris's time, it was the furniture maker, and then the French decorator, and then the German architect, and then the American industrial designer. By the 1980s, the players were the industrial designer, the mechanical engineer, the electrical engineer, software people were starting to get into the picture, and a little bit of what I call brand management, and you can see it down there. In the 1990s, after about a decade of explosive growth of Silicon Valley design, in which the product landscape of the world literally transformed, sometimes very, very awkwardly. That mouse I just showed you, they don't like me to show that picture because it's a really crappy piece of design. And you know, in subsequent generations, they became much more ergonomic. That's because physiologically trained designers began to show up at the table who understood ergonomics, who understood things about the mobility of the wrist and the lower back and the range of vision, and began to translate those things from kind of warm ideals into fairly rigorous science. The next stage, which kicks in, as I see it, around 1990, is the arrival of the social sciences. This is usually bad news. What was Auden's phrase, "Thou shalt not commit social science"? But at a certain point, and it was around 1990, the discipline of human factors, which actually had its origins in World War II, but I won't go into those details. The discipline of human factors begins to show up in the form of actual hiring practices in the design world. And these are sociologists, they are anthropologists. At IDEO, I sit next to a guy with a PhD in applied linguistics, and he thinks of himself as a designer, not a lapsed linguist. This is a very dear friend of mine named Christian Sinsarian, human factors specialist, and he's practicing design. You don't see him sitting at a drafting table with T-squares and things like that, or even a computer. The group that he was working with had been asked to rethink the experience of checking into a hospital. And so with the connivance of the hospital administration, but unbeknownst to most of the hospital staff, he checked himself in. And as you can see, he was about 30 seconds away from getting a terminal vasectomy before he pulled out his video camera and began recording. So what is...
That's commitment to one's,
That's commitment.
one's
Yeah,
goal.
because, you know, if the anesthetic had kicked in, it would have been curtains. But of course, what is happening here is people are bringing a very rigorous set of social science tested procedures to the analysis and the understanding of human experience, or in deference to the title that Shireen suggested to me, the human condition. They go out into the field and they observe people in every normal situation of their lives, of their workplaces, and they come to a much deeper understanding of what people's needs are. Often needs are latent. They are not even perceived by people who need them. And that is the area into which designers march, with the expectation that they can perhaps make some kind of a significant difference. So I'll begin moving toward a conclusion. I hope I am not going on too long, but I'm...
But you're worth it.
So are you. Where does that leave us now? In one sense, it is an enormously exciting time to be involved in design activity, and in particular in design education, because there has been a big shift in the mentality and the temperament of the students who are entering this field. They often don't know the history, and it's my job to tell them in my own highly biased way. But what they are aware of is the buzz, that it is not just a question of making cool things that will get them on the cover of some flashy magazine. But what has happened now is, with the crash of the dot-com economy in 2000, the conversation stopped being exclusively about money, which is where it was. And that was a very boring time to be in the academic side of design. And now people are talking, and I'm talking students, they are talking about three areas in particular in which their passions are really excited. One of them is third world development, and there's an enormous amount of fascinating stuff that is being done, essentially pro bono by some places, but other places are learning how to extract money from governments, from NGOs, from foundations, in order to work on problems ranging from micro-irrigation, small-scale construction, microfinancing. Designers are involved now in an almost unfathomably broad range of activities that don't look anything like making a streamlined toaster. Second area that students are interested in and are bringing into design professional practice when they graduate is obviously sustainability. That's going to be the watchword of the 21st century. It already is. Honored as much in the breach as in practice. So most of the major consultancies now that I am familiar with have some manner of commitment, up to and including IDEO, where I work, which has an entire sustainability practice. About 10 years ago, IDEO began to guarantee that every product that went out the door would pass through a rigorous human factors analysis, and now the guarantee is that every product that goes out the door will pass through a rigorous green analysis. And that has to do with the entire life cycle, from the origins of the materials to how people dispose of it at the end of its useful life. And then the third area, interestingly enough, turns out to be primary school education, which is not something that I could have possibly predicted. So you should never make an investment decision based on my predictions, but that's been a pretty interesting new development. So here is where I wrap things up. Oh, and I should also say that since the kind of platform of today's conference is web-based initiatives in many spheres, the importance of the web as a collaborative tool in the emerging reconfiguration of design, and also, very significantly, a feedback tool. Designers are continuously trying to get responses to their work from the user population that they are working with, and what we're going to see is a vast increase in the amount of interactive backing and forthing within the design community and between the design community and its target populations, and the web is going to be the tool for that. But that was almost a footnote. I'm sorry I can't go into that more deeply. Here's why it's all so important. And even though I tend to make a lot of jokes when I talk, I think that it is of absolutely critical importance. And you got some sense of that in the remarks that Sheila made previously. It's perhaps compressed into the image on a Greek postage stamp, and that's why there's the 4.5 drachmas down at the bottom. This is not actually a vase painting, although it's derived from one. This is an image from Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, and you've got Aeschylus's brother Atlas there holding the world on his shoulders, and Aeschylus is tied to the post while an eagle comes and gouges out his immortal liver every day at about lunchtime for 10,000 years. And the phrase that Aeschylus puts into the mouth of the chorus in Prometheus Bound is, it expresses the rage of Zeus in punishing Prometheus in this dastardly way. What? Men whose life is but a day possess already the hot radiance of fire? Zeus is furious because what Prometheus had done was to steal a spark of fire from the forge of the immortal gods in Olympus and smuggle it down to earth and give human beings fire, which stands for creativity, it stands for technology, it stands for all of the things that we are now going to be able to do. We are no longer going to have to eat our food raw. We can cook it. We can make iPods. We can do, whatever. And Zeus's fear, his anxiety, and his rage was that human beings as a race are far too immature to have a technology of this power at their disposal. What? Men whose lives are but a day, we're only here for a little while, possess already the hot radiance of fire? So here is a concluding example of what I mean by the tasks that lie ahead of us in the next generation of design, which many people around here are now calling design thinking. So we'll start by taking a very familiar object now. You don't have to worry about my turning off my cell phone because I don't have one. But one was recently given to me and I haven't quite figured out how to use it, so it's sitting at home because I keep forgetting to bring it with me.
Or ask your son.
Yeah. So here's this deliriously wonderful object. I don't know, how many of you have an iPhone? So I mean, it's the all-in-one. It does everything except make toast. Taken on its own terms, it's a pretty phenomenal artifact, and it is going to be the bane of my existence, partly because I expect to die sometime at the hands of a teenage driver talking on an iPhone who is too wrapped up in things. These are 4 shots of traffic fatalities that have occurred that are related to not iPhone use particularly, but I call it vehicular multitasking, people talking on cell phones while driving. According to a Harvard Medical School study, cell phone drivers kill approximately 2,400 Americans every year. That's serious. I mean, that's if 2,000, that's about the number of people that died in the World Trade Tower attacks. So just to put things into perspective. So what I want us to be thinking about is, what is the relationship between this deliriously wonderful object and the larger social context and the implications? I mean, this is a Promethean question. Men whose lives are but a day possess already the hot radiance of fire. The thing that I would like to promote most deeply in your thinking about how you might contribute to the next generation of design is what I sometimes call an anticipatory rationality, which is, it used to be that we worried as designers about what will be the consequences of failure. A client walks in and says, I have a whole lot of money, not a whole lot of time. I need you to build the next generation of this and get it on the shelves of Walmart by December. And you got to work and you designed it. And if you failed, then what happened? The client never comes back. Or worse, the client sues you. Big deal. Well, it's a minor deal, but it's a deal. That is the consequence of failure. And that is what most designers have previously been obsessed with. What I would like them to start obsessing about seriously, not the consequences of failure, but the consequences of success. So something like the iPhone or the cell phone generically, which is the object with the fastest market penetration in the history of the world, is a victim of its success. both in terms of the roughly 500 billion used cell phones that are piling up in southern China and everywhere else as we are figuring out what to do with them, but also the larger set of social consequences of the misuse, the ill-considered use, the necessity for our hosts to ask us to turn the damn things off because they are so annoying, or the 2,400 people that die on the roads on account of them every year. So what we need to do is be thinking about the consequences of our successes and anticipating them, thinking not just about solutions, but about the problems that our solutions will create. Thank you very, very much.
I'd like to open it to questions. We have time for 2 or 3.
Please.
Great. Thank you, Shireen.
Hi. Can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. My name is Juliette Feeney-Timsit with the French American Charitable Trust. I have a question for you. I have a husband who's working on these issues, and he thinks that the solution is to reduce consumption. At this point in time, do you think that's a viable option, or is it too late to start educating people to want less and to think that less is actually more?
Mm-hmm. Well, he sounds like my kind of guy, but you got there first, so. Here's what I think about that. If I reduce my consumption patterns, it's, how shall I put this in not terribly technical terms, it's not going to make a rat's ass worth of difference because I'm one person. But it is an intrinsically desirable practice as much as reusing and recycling. I mean, that is the reduced part of the triangle that we've got. And the way I think about things like that is I'm actually a Maoist, avant la lettre. And I always think back to Mao's famous let 100 flowers bloom in the, this is pre-cultural revolution period. And that's sort of how I feel now. I think that the Titanic is going down. The Carpathia is nowhere in sight. That was the ship that ultimately was closest by. And what we need to be doing is sending out 100 lifeboats. And hopefully some of them will reach the shore. I mean, we are in a very dire situation, and we are all trying very hard to be optimistic and to be looking as, and I think Sheila's key word in her presentation was, this is a problem that is solvable, and I absolutely agree with that, or at least I'm convincing myself to agree with that, because the consequences are just give up. But if we are looking at problems that are human-induced, I think we are looking at problems that admit of human solutions. And I don't know what those solutions are, and I just want to see every experiment. I have actually very little patience with some of the infighting that goes on within the environmental movement, because I think we have room for a vast multitude of experiments and out-and-out reduction. I mean, we're heading into an economic recession. That could be a very good thing for the environment. You know, it's a very bad thing for the subprime industry, but it could be a very good thing, and we may learn a lesson from that. So that is as far as I can go with that.
Thank you. Ken?
I'm not really a Maoist, but...
Ken Wilson with the Christensen Fund. Thanks for
Please
lots.
give my regards to Diane.
I will indeed. Thanks for lots of stimulating ideas. And you didn't have a chance to, as you said, to really explore the way in which the web is impacting this. And you said that primarily it's providing a feedback mechanism. But wouldn't you say that it's doing more than that? What about all these companies that are, in a sense, asking their customers to design the type of Lego or the type of whatever they want?
I'm very, very glad that you mentioned that. That's actually the third area after the web is a collaborative tool among designers. The web is an interactive tool to receive feedback. The phrase mass customization became rather popular about 15 years ago. But we've moved actually substantially beyond that, and we are beginning to think about how, well, we could put it this way, the historic fact of the last, of the modern era is the conversion after about 2 million years of making things one at a time by hand, which is what manufacture really means, to all of a sudden, sometime around 1770, we see the economic indicators kicking in of making large numbers of things all at once in multiples. And it may be that part of the promise of Web 2.0, 3.0, or 4.0 is that we can begin thinking again about making things one at a time, but not by going backward to, you know, some little German guy in an apron kind of carving a cuckoo clock, but rather using very advanced and sophisticated web-based tools to enable people to participate in the design of their own environments, their own clothing, their own vehicles, their own products. That's a big, big issue, and I can't believe I omitted mentioning that, so thank you very much for prompting me to do so.
Thank you, Ken. Okay.
Does the Tata car have the moral right to exist in the 21st century?
Oh, gosh. Well, Alessandro Mendini, he put the question in front of us. He didn't give us any answers. And I should write to him and ask him what he thinks about that. He'll probably say no. Here's the real moral mess that we are in when we are looking at the emergence, in particular, of China and India. I don't know if you saw the very first, my screensaver was this NASA map of Earth lights, of the Earth seen at night with the patterns of energy use indicated by little lights. And you see China's doing what the United States did about 100 years ago, which is industrialization moving from the eastern coastal cities west. So Chongqing is scheduled to become the biggest city in the world in the next 15 or 20 years or so. It'll be 30 million people, and that's way in the hinterland. That's where Chiang Kai-shek built his wartime headquarters because nobody had ever heard of it, and he thought mistakenly that Japanese aircraft couldn't get there. But that's another story. India, you see patterns of industrialization much more evenly distributed in China, but still really intense. So obviously these are the two major developing areas, and the populations involved are enormous. I saw a statistic recently that suggested that we routinely use a figure of around 1.2 to 1.3 billion people as the population of China. They think because of internal migration, it's very hard to count people in motion, that the population of China may be in excess of 1.5 billion. So I first read that and said, 1.2, 1.5. That's the population of North America. In between that, a rounding error. So the situation that we are in, of course, and the Chinese bring this to our attention in a very blunt way at every possible occasion, is that we have had the luxury of the last 200 years in Britain, 100 years in the US, of making the nastiest cars and the nastiest refrigerators and the nastiest air conditioning systems that you could imagine. Because after all, the thought that you could run out of air, run out of water, what a ridiculous, insane thought if somebody had raised that 100 years ago. Almost as ridiculous as saying, you know, we're all going to be walking around with telephones in our pockets or something. It's just bizarre. And now we're running out of air, water, and all of the rest in a serious way. Do we have the moral right to tell people in particular East Asia and South Asia, that they do not have the right to the same lifestyle, the same quality of living, and the same level of material affluence that we have enjoyed for this long? The Tata car, which is going to sell for, was about $2,500 and be accessible to vast numbers of people, and is a potentially devastating ecological phenomenon, as will be Chinese refrigerators. That, so I think, you know, there is a very large-scale answer to that, and that is we are squandering a historic opportunity to transfer green technologies to China and India right now in a large scale. And that's, you know, the last 8 years of American politics, that will be seen as not the Iraq War, which is, I think, a disaster, but the failure to have done that will be seen as the signal failure of American civilization in that period.
And on that, another sobering note. Thank you, Dr. Katz.
Thank you. Thank you.